So good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us and sharing your precious time with us. I'll just introduce myself. My name's Daniel Nichols. I'm a partner here at Watermark. I lead the public sector practice and the for-purpose practice with my colleague Claire Crawford in Sydney. Our practice also includes a thriving board search practice as well. We've also got a strong team in Melbourne made up of Jen Darcy-Smith and a recent new member, Chris Grant. And also I think we've got a few team members from our interim team online as well. Caroline, Alex, and a team in Melbourne as well. So thank you very much for your time. I'll just start and also pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation, where I am today at least, and also pay my respects to any elders past and present and any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who might be joining us today. So I'm delighted to welcome you for today's webinars about leaders and LinkedIn with Roger Christie from Propel. It's a really interesting conversation I was having with a potential board member for one of the board searches we were doing and talking about their social media. And I was advising them to essentially refrain from posting on social media, because one of the things we're asked to do from our clients is essentially look into all potential board members' social media presence and advise them if there's anything adverse. And then she was talking through the work she was doing with Roger, and it completely changed my view on social media and your digital presence. And so having looked at Roger's work, I think this is a really interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to hopefully he can impact your understanding and viewpoint on this topic as well. So just before I introduce Roger, just some housekeeping. We've got an hour session today. Roger's going to do a presentation for probably about 40 minutes, and then the idea is we've got 15 to 20 minutes of questions at the end. So we really want this to be interactive and for you to take some tangible ideas out of the webinar. So please do put your questions into the chat and make sure that we can address them at the end. The session's recorded, and we will have it accessible via our webpage and LinkedIn following this. And then finally, just in case you missed it, Roger has offered a free audit to a lucky participant. So we'll do a random number generator at the end and reach out to that person privately if you're the winner. Without further ado, I will introduce Roger, founder of Propel, a consultancy which focuses on digital reputation management. I won't try and talk through what he does. I'll leave that better for him. And over to you, Roger. Please talk us through what you've got to talk to today.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for the intro, and thanks everyone for joining. I love that story, Daniel, about your own experience, and I'm hopeful that today, if nothing else, if you come away from today thinking, yeah, I'd still prefer to be silent on social media, at least you'll walk away knowing both sides of both ends of that spectrum in terms of participation versus silence. So hopefully it's food for thought, if nothing else. So yeah, I will do a proper intro in a moment, Daniel, but I want to start, I suppose, by just recognizing, I suppose, what it could be the legacy attitude and the legacy mindset around LinkedIn and social media more broadly, particularly if you're in a board level, you're a non-executive director, or if you're sitting in a senior executive leadership role. It can sometimes feel a little bit like this. And I don't know if you've ever said this yourself. I don't know if someone's ever said this to you. I've certainly heard it myself, particularly in times of crises, or when people are feeling like, the trolls are out to get you. They're looking for a scapegoat online. Can we just turn it off? And I think that I've heard a phrase which is called hug your haters. I'm not going to get into the complexities of that particular statement, but I think there is truth in that all feedback is gold. And whether it's coming through social media or elsewhere, the trick is being able to pick out those trends versus those squeaky wheels and those repeat offenders. So we can't turn off social media, unfortunately. And there's a really important reason why you shouldn't or wouldn't opt out of social media. And I want to bring in a comment that actually one of my clients made to me in a meeting. We were talking about the idea of leaders being more active on social media. So a bit like the conversation you've had, Daniel, and saying, well, is this a good idea for them to be more visible, more active, participate in conversations? Or is it a better idea for them to remain visible and to stay offline? And the comment that my client made was, well, we've opted out of conversations and people have disqualified us. And what I think is really important is the next part of that statement. We can't now jump back in when it suits us. I think we want to take all the good stuff from social media. We want to benefit from the scale and amplification opportunities it presents. But at the same time, we'd rather some of that noise just disappear into the background and don't have to worry about it. So I want to leave that thought with you and that comment from my client with you, because I think it's an important consideration for all of us in terms of how we turn up online, whether we turn up online, how we turn up online, and how we participate, and whether that gives us the right, the credibility, the authority, and the trust to be able to influence some of the most important conversations that are happening online today. And if there's one thing you take away from today, and I think it's probably the tone that you mentioned in your comment at the start, Daniel, the only conversation you can influence is a conversation you're part of. And the reality is that these conversations online will continue to go on around us, whether we like it or not, whether we want them to or not. We certainly cannot control. LinkedIn, as an example, has over 1 billion users globally now, over 14 million in Australia. We can't control those conversations, but we can absolutely influence them by being part of them. And that's the message that I think is most important to hear today. So I want to introduce myself properly. I am the founder and managing director of Propel, as Daniel said, but I'm certainly not the guy on your screen right now. And I'm certainly not the woman on your screen either, just to be really clear. So this is Roger Christie, but it's not me, the founder and managing director of Propel. This is actually Roger Christie, the 73-year-old ordained minister of the THC ministry in Hawaii. Now, he's a bit more notorious than I am. He's got a bit of a reputation himself. He's got a Wikipedia entry, and it talks about the time that he was administering cannabis, the sacramental herb, as he called it, as part of his services. And he ended up doing hard time in prison for distribution of cannabis. So just to be clear, that's not me. But the point that I'm making here is that I don't necessarily control what comes up on the internet when someone Googles my name. And in fact, there's something a little bit closer to home. According to Wikipedia, if you delve into that entry, what you'll find is that according to Wikipedia in 2008, Roger Christie of Sydney, Australia was a tool, which I think is a bit harsh because I don't really know Wikipedia that well. But as it turns out, this is and this is probably explained a lot about my friendship groups. This is what you call a digital prank, where a friend of mine who thought it would be terribly clever to go into the Wikipedia entry for Roger Christie and add the line at the bottom that you can see, Roger Christie of Sydney, Australia is a tool. Now, don't worry, because the Wikipedia mods, the moderators, they clean that out. It's back to just Roger Christie in Hawaii right now, so you won't find that slander on my reputation anymore. I didn't have to do anything about it, actually. But the point is, we don't control it. And I think this is something that we should all understand. We can't control our digital reputation today. And it's no longer who I say I am. It's Google. It's what does Google say I am? Who does it say I am? What information comes up in that first page of results? Now, if you're looking at that and you're thinking, that's mildly terrifying. What happens if someone said that, I was a tool or anything like that online? Well, this is the interesting point about silence versus participation. And particularly when we talk about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is your best opportunity to influence how the world sees you. Why? If you Google your own name now, and bear in mind that the algorithm will serve up a version of the internet and search results that's based on your search behavior and your interests. So everyone sees a different result on Google. So if you want to get an authentic view, go and search in incognito mode. But if you hop into Google now and search for your own name, what will come up? It's very likely to be, if you've been quoted or featured in media content. So if you've been featured in an article in the Fin, the Australian, Sydney Morning Herald, Age, something like that, it's very likely that will be high up the search results. But if not, or even if you have, it's equally likely that your LinkedIn profile is the very first search result you'll see. So if we know that the pattern of behavior for people today is that they're going online and they're searching to find out whether you are who you say you are, whether something someone else has said about you rings true online when they do their own research, if this is their method of behavior, often even before they've met you, you want to claim that first spot on Google search results, because that first spot is your ticket to influence what they see about you, what you stand for, your voice, your values. So it's a really important and valuable opportunity to harness, and that's why we're focusing on LinkedIn today. So what we're going to run through is, I suppose, a little bit of a definition around what is risky, because I know everyone has their own perceptions of risk. And certainly legacy attitudes around social media and LinkedIn are that participation is more risky. What if you say the wrong thing? What will people do? So we'll look into those common scenarios, certainly that I talk with board members or senior executives. Then how to better manage risk. It's all well and good to say what is risky and what are our opinions on that. What are some practical steps that you can take to start changing things in your favor, taking greater control over that? And then, as Daniel said, we will have time for open Q&A at the end. So welcome your questions throughout the session. Please, by all means, feel free to drop them in as we go through. And if not, there's certainly plenty of myths that I'm happy to bust around how LinkedIn, social media, the algorithms work. So let's dive into what is risky. There's a perception, if you said, as I said right at the start, that silence or participation. These are my two options for social media. Which is more risky? Is it more risky, as Daniel was saying at the start, to actually get involved, say the wrong thing, be called out for something, and end up with egg on your face? Or is it more risky to stay offline and allow other people to control your narrative, either you personally or the organizations that you're involved with? And the view that I've come to take is that participation and timely communication in those forums where audiences are active, in those forums where influence is made and shaped and opinions are formed, it's really important to understand that if people are going online to search for information and that you have some skin in the game there and can influence that through your social media channels, not necessarily through mainstream media. They're the gatekeeper, so we don't always have open access to them, and they're not always going to tell our side of the story. Social media presents an opportunity for us to control our own narrative and to put our perspective out there. Now, that's not as simple as just broadcasting information to people to try and correct misinformation. It requires an ongoing commitment and an ongoing presence, surrounded by credible, authoritative people too, your network. But if you're a known, visible entity online and you're regularly contributing to conversations and you're surrounded by credible people, participation is far more powerful because it means that people know you're there. And when they're looking for information about a specific issue that might be going on, they know where to go. They know that you're there. They know that you're going to share your perspective on it. And that perspective is important to correct that misinformation, as I was saying before. You can't do any of that if you don't have a profile, and you can't do any of that if you stay silent and allow others to control the dialogue. So a really important consideration there around what's risky. It's not that silence is without risk. It's not that participation is without risk. But what we do know is the only conversation you can influence is a conversation you're part of. So participation comes with greater rewards, provided you have guardrails and provided you have education and understanding of how this environment works. So an example that I talked to a little while ago, and obviously we all know the opposite scenario and how that's played out. An example that I talked to a couple of months ago was around the approach that directors and executives were taking towards the voice to parliament. And what was interesting is Debbie Blakey, who's the CEO of Hester, as many of you will know. We don't work with Hester. I don't work with Debbie personally, but she's someone who I've been observing, and particularly in partnership with Nicola Roxon, the chair of Hester, to see how they would talk about issues, social issues online. So more than just the corporate script, more than just the work day to day, but much more about what does the organization stand for? What issues does it represent on behalf of its stakeholders, its staff, its partners, its customers? And Debbie was one of the very few who took an active and consistent approach to sharing the organization's view and her own, and obviously the leadership team's view on what they felt was the right decision around an enshrined voice to parliament. And you can see here just one example from her LinkedIn page, a video that she posted about their position and why. And what was interesting about that, we were looking at Hester and just saying, well, what an interesting example where a leader has decided to take control of their direct line, communication line, to their stakeholders. And Debbie's built a bit of a presence on LinkedIn, and Nicola's also built a presence on LinkedIn, talking directly to their key stakeholders in their own words at a time that suits them, taking control of that dialogue to influence how they perceive that organization. At the same time, we were looking at some of the major banks just to see how they were active or not online around, in this case, a key social issue, the voice referendum. And it was interesting to find that only one post over the course of 12 months from all four big bank CEOs have been dedicated to the voice to parliament. We found that quite interesting. Again, this is the divide between participation and silence. Which one is more risky? Now, I haven't heard of shareholders, customers, staff abandoning Hester. I'm happy to be proven wrong on that, but I haven't heard that mass exodus as a result of the referendum. Instead, this was more about Debbie putting her views forward, understanding the needs of stakeholders, listening to stakeholders, and putting her perspective out into the market. Now, you'll all have your own views on that, and I'm confident you will, and you're very right to. I think the question I'd like to leave you with is it more risky to be silent when stakeholders expect you to talk, or is it more risky to participate and share a point of view? That being said, we're never shooting from the hip on social media, and we're not entering into these environments without an understanding of them. It's important to listen first and understand the needs of stakeholders before you communicate in any forum. If we're talking about communication, then, well, what's better? Is it better to broadcast? Is that more risky or less risky? Or is listening more risky or less risky? Well, in this case, and we often see this, particularly when senior leaders hear, well, I need to be active on LinkedIn or I need to be active on social media, the assumption is I need to talk, I need to post in order to be active. Now, I've got some research that we recently conducted that debunks that quite a bit. But in this particular example, we run a podcast, and I had a conversation with a lady called Sarah Walker-Smith. Now, Sarah's the CEO of a group of legal and professional services firms, AMPA, in the UK. She's also the CEO of Shakespeare Martineau, which is one of their firms. And what Sarah said in our conversation the other week really struck me. And it shows the shift in attitude of what I consider to be more familiar and more capable leaders in this space. Is we're not looking at social media and we're not looking at LinkedIn as a place to simply broadcast and tell people what's going on in our world. In her view, we need to listen. And she was saying, particularly at this time, given the complexities of the challenges the world faces, the division on social issues, the challenges that every organization faces around trust and talent, we need to be listening, need to be in listening mode, as she says, to understand what's going on and how or who we can work with to fix it. Now, as I was saying before, if LinkedIn has over 1 billion users today globally, and those 1 billion users you would hope have some intellectual capital and knowledge and understanding of different areas of the market and the issues that you might be grappling with in your organization. If we opt out of social media, then we lose access to what is essentially the largest focus group that you could possibly access today. We lose access to that knowledge and intelligence to inform and influence or enhance our own perceptions. Yes, we need to know where to listen, but having access to it is critical. And that's where listening comes in, as Sarah says. And then on the second part of that, this is the other part of her statement, the more we listen, the more we have an open mind, the more we're open to changing our perspective on things, the more likely we are to find a different solution. And for her, social media has been that gateway. It was the source that provided stimulation of new ideas, access to new people who she might be able to collaborate with to solve really gnarly, complex issues that she and her organization and her stakeholders are facing today. So whether we go in with a broadcast mindset and choose to just tell people what's going on in our world, or whether we choose to enter with a mindset of listening and learning from those that are out there on social media, not everyone, not the noise, informed opinions and views, stakeholders who are relevant to us. Listening is a far less risky approach than broadcasting and coming across as either tone deaf or missing important insights and collaborative opportunities. So what about the environment overall? And I'll show you a wonderful quote with you in the moment that came from one of our very senior political figures. But the idea around social media, is it better to just ignore it and do our own thing? Whatever our agenda is, whatever we want to get out of it, is it better to approach things that way? Is that less risky? Or is it less risky to actually respect the environment for what it is in all its weird and wonderful mannerisms that social media has? And I'm not trying to pretend it's got a clean slate. Absolutely not. There are some really wacky things out on social media, but that doesn't mean we ignore it altogether, because if we did, we'd be opting out of humanity. In this case, there's a really interesting quote that came from our former Prime Minister at the start of the COVID pandemic. And he was quoted as saying, there's a lot of misinformation out there. I completely agree. There was a lot of misinformation out there at the start of the pandemic. But his comment about avoid social media, don't believe it, it's rubbish. Go to health.gov.au, go to the relevant state health websites. You can see the frustration in his voice around just ignore the well-worn paths you have through your thumb on your smartphone, your habit to go to Facebook or to go to LinkedIn or to go to Twitter, X, to get the information that you get every single day from the sources that you know. Stop that behavior and instead go to the official sources. That would be great. Thank you. And I agree with his intent. I agree that if people had sooner gone to those authorities for information, for the right information, Absolutely. We would have probably had a much faster or easier resolution to things. But at the same time, I think what former Prime Minister Scott Morrison was saying here missed a really important aspect, and that is that accessibility to information trumps authority every single time. So if we've got 20 plus million people who use social media around Australia, and those people are used to accessing social media to find that information, and that information is provided to them in a really simple, easy to consume format, we've got to respect that convention, and we've got to understand how it works to then use that to our advantage, to participate and to contribute in a way that people see us as a valued participant, and they want to hear what we have to say. The examples of Debbie Blakey at Hester earlier, understanding this environment and understanding how it works is really important. And that's not just my opinion. The University of Canberra did some research in that early stage of the pandemic as well, just to ask people, well, where are you getting your news and information on COVID? So it wasn't that Scott Morrison was frustrated for no reason. The reality is that the second most frequented source of information was social media, above health.gov.au, the official source, above state government websites, an official source, above other health authorities. People will go where they know. And so the important thing is we need to understand and recognize and respect that, and to participate in the environment where they're active if we want to influence public perceptions today. This is a big one too. Is it more risky to be professional, or is it more risky to be personal? I hear this one a lot. And this is where I want to bring in some of the recent research that we've done, our digital reputation report. Because I think if one of the standard perceptions that people have around social media and LinkedIn, particularly at a senior level like yours, is we need to be super professional. We need to keep it very corporate online. And there are some people who feel very comfortable in that space, and I completely understand it. But the reality is, if the outcome we're looking for is cut through, if the outcome we're looking for is to influence public opinions, and also to understand public opinions, for people to tell us what they're really thinking, for us to be able to get cut through with our messages, we need to respect what works best in that environment. Simply copying and pasting a media release, or copying and pasting an article from the website and sharing it on LinkedIn and putting it out there, and then disappearing and not engaging with any of the comments, is not going to build trust and credibility with audiences. It's not going to build that two-way conversation where you can learn rich insights and experiences from stakeholders. Instead, being more human, we talk about the human faces, voices, and values in that digital reputation report. The importance of not being personal in the view of sharing sensitive information, nothing confidential, absolutely not, and not being overly gushy or emotional if that's not your style. That's not what I'm saying at all. Simply sharing a bit more about the human behind the title, whether you're a board member or whether you're a senior executive. So what we did in our research, the digital reputation report, we had a look at the different types of content that over 100 of our most senior public servants posted on LinkedIn in 6 months earlier this year. And what we found was, as you can see over on the left-hand chart here, what we found was that just 5% of all posts that those leaders made, just 5% were what we would consider human stories, human experiences, things that relate to their own personal experiences, background, values. 80% related to work-related matters. I'm attending this today. What a great event. It was a pleasure to meet such and such at this particular industry partner. 80% related to work. If we come and look at this chart over here, though, what's really interesting is that even though they were 13 times more likely to post about work than human-related matters, on the right-hand side, what we see is a very different story. So that same massive chunk of the pie in grey is this tiny chunk of the pie here. You can see that actually 50% of the impact comes from those much smaller or much less frequent posts about their human experiences. If people want to hear about your competence, if people want to hear about your credibility, they can go to a website to see that, and they can experience that in terms of your technical craft. I think I would argue that for anyone who's got to a senior level of leadership within any organization, either as a board member or as an executive, the assumption is that they've got there because of their competence, because of their capability. Where social media presents this rare opportunity is to provide more about the human person, the voice, the values, the voice, faces, and values of those leaders, because that's what will form a human connection. That's what will form trust. And as we talk about in our report, competence is just one part of that trust equation. Warmth is really, really key to form a connection with audiences. And that connection is key, not just in good times, but also in challenging times where your reputation is being questioned. So don't underestimate the power of personal. An example of this from the report is a post that Susan Pearce, Secretary of New South Wales Health, made. Now, if you look at this, I don't see it as being terribly risky. I don't see it as being terribly sensitive or personal or anything like that. It's simply a very human moment in what is otherwise a work setting. And by capturing that photo, you can see the relief on her face, the time when the vaccines were being rolled out. And you can see the relief on her face alongside Dr. Kerry Chan. And you can get a sense from that. If you're looking at this right now and you're smiling because you can see her response to that, that's the connection that's formed by sharing more than just a corporate script on social media. And the final one I'll talk to is this idea of me versus we. Is it more risky to go in with a me mindset, or is it more risky to go in with a we mindset? Well, in this case, social media is very much about collaboration. I think we go in too often and we think, I need to go out and share my views with the world. I need to broadcast. There's this perception that if I'm going to be active on social media or on LinkedIn, that's what I have to do. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The real opportunity for social media is these cross-sector collaborations, these partnerships, this networking, working together with people, like-minded individuals, credible individuals in their own spheres of influence. And by doing that, what happens is we actually become seen as a participant. We get invited into things, we get included in things. And as a leader, we set the tone for others as well. If your leadership team is active like Natalie James at the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, all of a sudden it empowers the workforce beneath her to be active and participating and accessing those same benefits of intelligence and cross-sector collaborations themselves. Leaders set the tone by having a we mindset, by empowering and encouraging their people to speak up, by interacting in the comments, as you can see here, by simple comments that reflect who they are and their personality, that rings true with their staff, their stakeholders offline as well. So it's far better to take a we mindset into social media than it is a me mindset, and simply talk about the things that you want to talk about and leave all other conversations and comments separate to that. You can see some other examples here, even on potentially controversial conversations, like the tie wearing Senate estimates conversation. For anyone who followed that, that can be turned into a bit of fun. And they can be turned into something that actually galvanizes the team and brings them together online. And what this does, it shares an element of the agency's culture, not just reflected by the leader themselves, but also through the people who are part of that process and who contributed to that process. You can't read this and not get a sense of the fun that the team at Dewar is having. And that's amplified to audiences anywhere, anytime online. It's interesting also to note the number of directors who jumped in the comments on this particular post and said, love it, well done. There is an active community of NEDs and board members there already on LinkedIn, and these people are sharing their own perspective. And it's really good to see that they're not shying away from what might be considered something controversial, because as long as you're clear on what you stand for, as long as your views, your values are clear, as long as they align with your audiences and stakeholders, that's really important. We're obviously not setting out to offend anyone, but as long as you're clear and consistent on that, what you can create is this groundswell of support, as this post shows. It's just one example. So these are all things that sit at different sides of the risk spectrum, and hopefully they've provided a different perspective for you. That was the intent. But I want to go a little bit more practical on this and say, well, how can you better manage risk online? This is all well and good. It's all well and good for Natalie. It's all well and good for others, for Debbie's. How can I better manage risk online? How can I participate safely? How can I listen effectively? We talk to our 5 drivers of digital reputation. Now, you might think of your own digital presence as simply this element, your profile. My LinkedIn profile, my Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is, my profile is my digital reputation. It's not. And it's actually broken down into 5 core areas. Profile is one of them, don't get me wrong, and first impressions do count. So that profile, you want it to make sure it reflects who you are and what you stand for, because that's what people will see in the first result on Google. But this is far more important. Your purpose is the first and most important of those 5 drivers. It's why you would turn up online, why you would use any of these channels to try and reach and influence key audiences. I cannot stress this enough. It is the single most important factor that will both improve your performance online and greatly reduce risk. Because if you're sitting down and asking the question yourself, but also with the leadership team, you're asking the question, why are we using this platform? All of a sudden, everything that you say and do online, everything that you don't say and do online comes with a clear purpose and direction behind it. With a clear purpose, and that means, and we'll look at a purpose pyramid framework in a moment, having a clear purpose means you're being clear on your goals. Why am I using this and what am I trying to achieve? You're clear on your target audiences, who you're trying to reach and what matters to them, what issues they care about. And thirdly, your own personal passions, the things that are unique about your story and your journey and brought you to where you are today. If you're clear on those three things, all of a sudden, these other four drivers make an awful lot of sense. If you know who you're talking to, you write your profile a certain way. If you know which stakeholders matter most to you, you're listening to key conversations. You're reading the room and getting important context from them because you know where to focus your efforts. Not what LinkedIn serves up and what you thumb through your feed going, oh, I wish I didn't see that person anymore. It's very targeted listening and intelligence gathering. You know, in terms of your activity, what conversations to enter into and which ones to avoid. And if you spend a little bit more time on platforms like LinkedIn, you learn the functionality too. What button to press and what's going to give what outcome is really important too. And finally, with a clear purpose, really, really importantly, you build a network of credible individuals around you that are going to both help you access those future opportunities and intelligence, and importantly, protect you when times get tough. And I have seen this time and time again with executives who, even if they're getting challenged or questioned in media about their own credibility and reputation, if you go back and look at their social media contacts, it's actually a safe haven for them because they've built trust and credibility with that audience over time. And that's an environment where people who know them best can vouch for them, their credibility, their expertise. It's a really valuable protection buffer. So they're the five drivers. And what I'd leave you with, and I think Daniel mentioned at the start, we'll share a recording of this session, also a pack for you to run through. So you can have a look at this in your own time as well. These are 5 questions I'd leave you with to consider how you're doing each of these right now, and whether it's worth reviewing these questions from the purposes or from the perspective of your own individual career and ambitions, and also from the perspective of your organization and managing their reputation online as well, what you can do to contribute towards that. So 5 questions there for you. But I want to focus in now on purpose. This is the purpose pyramid framework that I mentioned, and I will share this in the pack afterwards, because if you do nothing else off the back of this session, 1, remember that the only conversation you can influence is a conversation you're part of, and 2, in terms of a practical exercise, have a look at this purpose pyramid. Because as I say, it breaks down the most important components of your own digital reputation and how you can most positively influence the key stakeholders that matter to you, the key stakeholders who are interested in you. And what happens is when you focus on these 3 areas, your goals, your audiences, and your passions, suddenly your social media presence, whether it's LinkedIn or elsewhere, is meaningful and relevant. And I think importantly, it's authentic. You're saying things in your own words, in your own way that connects to your story, your tone of voice. I often have this discussion with communications teams who say, no, we need to make sure all the grammar is perfect. Well, no one's ever perfect offline either. We all have our own little grammar nuances. Some people use double spaces, exclamation marks, forget to use caps, all this sort of stuff. When I see that sort of activity from a leader, all it tells me is that it's authentic. It tells me that it's them writing that comment, and that breeds trust. It breeds connection. So it's really important to use your own authentic voice. Again, not being overly personal and confidential information, but simply talking in a way that reflects who you are. So this is how we break it down. And what I'd encourage you to do after this session is to just spend a little bit of time looking at this yourself. And I do mean 15, 20 minutes. Just thinking about, what are you or your organization working towards online? Why are you using a platform like LinkedIn? What are you trying to achieve? And you can be as specific or as vague with that as you want. It's really just to set your North Star. What am I working towards here? Why am I bothering to use LinkedIn? Asking that question will then help you understand, okay, so which people, which audiences, which stakeholders matter most to me on that journey? And importantly, what matters to them? It's not about me firing messages at them, the broadcast mentality. It's about understanding what matters to them in order to participate in a constructive conversation, to learn from them, to learn information and intelligence and context from them, and to build stronger relationships that are going to be helpful in good times and in bad times. And the final point, as I was saying, what are you most passionate about and why? What gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you do the role you currently do? One thing that people hate, every single leader I've spoken to hates writing on LinkedIn, is their about section. I don't know if you love it. If you do, you're in very rare company. So I haven't met one leader so far. A lot of people write it in the third person. A lot of people depersonalize their LinkedIn about section. The reality is that it's the one place on the internet where you can tell people your narrative in terms of what brought you to where you are today, why you do what you do, and who you're wanting to connect with, who you're wanting to form a relationship with, to hopefully help solve some really complex issues, as Sarah Walker-Smith was saying. So it's a really important piece of real estate when you think of it that way, and a great opportunity to step into the light and be more visible on LinkedIn and immediately start influencing perceptions. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that. The second thing I wanted to focus on in terms of how you can better manage your digital reputation and managing risk online is your activity. I think one of the great concerns that people have, if I can call it that, is if I press this button, what will happen kind of scenario. I've seen plenty of times, for example, where leaders have gone to make comments on posts and they've intended to write a private message to someone and accidentally posted it publicly on LinkedIn. Even little things like that, they do make a difference. And if you have made a mistake like that before, it's the once bitten, twice shy scenario. You can avoid these environments. So I think having an understanding of how the algorithm works and how the different post functions and formats work can actually be greatly encouraging and empowering for leaders. So what I wanted to share with you is just run through the different post types quickly, what they mean and how you might use them, and then also importantly, look at the impact that choosing one over the other might have. So from 1 through to 5 here, on the left-hand side, this is your standard LinkedIn post. It's the most effective way to reach your network and to reach beyond your network. So treat that as your table stakes for LinkedIn. If you've got something you want to say that's relatively simple, quick and easy, posting is your best option. Commenting is something that people often forget, but commenting is actually a really powerful way to contribute your perspective to an ongoing issue that an industry leader, a peer, a colleague might be, an executive. If you're sitting in a board capacity, they might already be having that conversation. Your comments are actually a very effective way of adding your insight and expertise or bringing people into the conversation by tagging them. One thing that we see all the time is a lot of non-executive directors love to repost content from the organization or repost content from the executive team. The reality is that reposting doesn't work. So I would 100% encourage you, if there's one simple tweak you make to your behavior, if you're a reposter at the moment, and I know LinkedIn encourages you to do it, it's very odd that they encourage people to do it, stop reposting and start commenting. When you comment, 1, it'll save you time. Comments are far quicker and easier to write. 2, what you do is you bring people from your network into the post itself and you focus their attention on the post itself. So kind of like a cross-pollination of networks. And number 3, you get seen as a contributor to a discussion rather than someone who's that me mindset on social media and always trying to start my own. And that's all beside the fact that the performance of that post will greatly improve versus reposting. It just doesn't perform. We had one client who had 250 times less performance on a repost than an original piece of content. It is minuscule. So I'd encourage you to consider that one. The third option here is your reactions. So you've got your thumbs up or like, celebrate, support, love, insightful, and haha, funny laugh. Choose the right reaction according to the tone of the post. And my advice would be, don't overdo these. Know that they are actually the least impactful signal you can send LinkedIn. If I comment on someone's post, for example, I'm 70 to 75% more likely to see their post in my feed the next time I log in. If I react, if I just give them a thumbs up, I'm only 30% more likely. So you can see how LinkedIn will influence your experience and what you see in your own LinkedIn feed based on your engagement efforts. So if you want to see more of someone in your feed, choose to comment more than choosing to react more. Do both, and it's twice as good. The fourth one, and this is one that's often underused and undervalued by people, is the private message. We go into LinkedIn with this kind of public and broadcast mindset, and we forget the very important thing that one-to-one relationships at the end of the day are what keep the world turning. So if you want to reach one single individual and you want to influence their perspective on things, don't underestimate the power of a private message. I was talking about the 70 to 75% influence you have from comments, the 30% influence you have from reactions. Well, a private message, if you send someone a private message, you are 85% more likely to see that person's content in your feed the next time you log in to LinkedIn. It's nearly 3 times more powerful than a reaction. So don't underestimate the power of private message. And the way it works, the algorithm is looking at your behavior and it's saying, well, if Roger's decided to send Daniel a private message, then LinkedIn assumes Roger and Daniel must have a closer relationship than Roger just, spraying and praying on LinkedIn. So it treats that engagement as much more valuable and powerful. So don't underestimate the power of the private message to get you a more clean, relevant, and valuable feed. And the last one I'll talk to is the article. This is one of those publishing features on LinkedIn that gets a bit of a bad rap because the reach on these particular posts doesn't tend to generate a great deal of reach compared to your standard LinkedIn post over here. But what is great about articles is their SEO benefits. Google will index your articles. So if you as a board member or an executive have a very key point that you want to make on a certain issue, something you want to stand behind, and you want people to see that when they search for your name on Google, try an article, because an article will actually index better on Google so that the masses can see it. Just know that it won't generate as much reach and influence in LinkedIn itself. Okay. There's a question that's just come through. Thank you, Paula. So I'll jump to that one, and then we'll look at some of the algorithm bits and pieces. What's your advice on receiving connection requests from people you've never met versus people you may have met but are in the same industry? It's a great question, Paula. The whole idea of connections is really important, and I'm actually going to skip on to this particular slide, and I'll come back. Is this the one I want to share? No, here we go. So this is the stat that I want to talk to in answer to your question. Your connections really matter. They are really important. Often people think we need to have thousands, if not tens of thousands of connections to be effective on LinkedIn. I can promise you it is much more a quality versus quantity game. That doesn't mean we select 25 of our best and closest friends and we just stick with that. There is benefits to be gained by having a larger network, and the obvious one being the more people in your first level connections, your immediate network, the more people you get access to in your second level connections. So basically you're opening up more of LinkedIn, the more people you have in your first level network. But the risk, and I think what you're touching on there, Paula, in terms of accepting connection requests from random people, the risk there is if your network is full of people who don't know you, if your network is full of people who have just, on a whim decided to reach out and connect without any context, if your network is full of people who are trying to sell you stuff, which is sometimes a criticism of LinkedIn, what's happening is this first point, your posts are now 10% more likely to be seen by your immediate network, your first level connections. So if your network is full of the wrong sorts of people, if I can call them that, when LinkedIn pushes your content out, it's seen by an audience that isn't interested in your content. LinkedIn uses this first receiver audience to influence how far your content goes. So if your immediate network doesn't engage with your content, LinkedIn goes, okay, it mustn't be worth that much. I won't push this further. If your network is very interested and invested in what you have to say, they respond positively, all of a sudden, your content reaches a much wider audience. So in answer to your question, Paula, my advice to people is always to be discerning, but don't be ruthless. I personally reach out to people. If someone sends me a connection request without any context, I'll reach out and say, thanks for the request, but just out of interest, did someone suggest you reach out to me? What was the story there, basically? You might think that's overly onerous. My personal view is I'm happy to do it because I know the gains that it will lead to in terms of the algorithm. And importantly, if I give someone a chance to qualify their connection request, it can accelerate a business conversation very quickly. They'll suddenly give me the context for why they reached out, and immediately you've got a reason to follow up and have a chat off the back of that. So I'd strongly encourage you, one, to be discerning with your connection requests, and two, if you're sending them out, give people context when you're sending a proactive invitation to connect. Thanks for the question though, Paul. So that does lead into this algorithm, which is, the black box of LinkedIn, the system that sits behind everything we see and do on LinkedIn. And I'm not going to go through all these in detail. You will get these in the pack. So happy for you to have a look over them in more detail. But what I will say is the key elements here, the key elements that you should consider. Niche authority is a good thing. LinkedIn does not want generalists. It wants people who know a certain area very, very well and very deeply and have a network of people that are involved in that same niche area of expertise. Why? Because it's basically trying to build an entire catalog of professional experts across a whole range of issues rather than having generalists who cover them all. And so that's why success on LinkedIn doesn't actually mean mass impressions and mass reach and virality. Success on LinkedIn means reaching and influencing the right people. So try and keep that in mind. This is not a numbers game. It's not a popularity contest. It's actually about reaching the right people. And in some cases, that can be as simple as one person. And if that's your objective, pursue that objective over anything else. The second point I'll make on this slide is this idea around company posts. So if your organization has a company page, know that your company page and every other company page out there is competing for just 3% of a user's LinkedIn feed. Company page posts do not generate cut through. That means the other 97% is taken up by, yes, ads, of course, LinkedIn's here to make money, but 2 personal posts from people in your network. So when I talk about the importance of leaders being visible online, it's not simply for the sake of more leaders being out there. It's really important that people actually share their voice and opinion and their views and harness their own network. Because when they do that, they actually tap into the algorithm and the fact that they're more likely to get exposure. And you'll see this in your content. We had an experience with a client that had 120,000 followers on their company page. One particular individual had 380 connections. I can tell you that the person with 380 connections generated more interest on their one post, the exact same post that the company page shared. 380 connections outperformed 120,000 for a company page. It's mind-boggling, but that's just the way that LinkedIn works. Some questions have come through. Sorry, how often should you post? Was a question from Robin. I hope this is all right, Daniel. I'm just jumping in and answering these as we go because they do often relate to the algorithm.
Absolutely, dive in there.
Excellent. So, Robin, there's two ways to answer that. The first is what LinkedIn's looking for is consistency versus frequency. So it wants to know that it can rely on you. If that's once a week, if that's once a month, it can rely on you for that consistency of content. The other way to look at it is you don't want to cannibalize your own content. So if you're posting 2 times a day, and the example of that is if you're at an industry event, for example, a lot of people love to post on the go and share regular updates on LinkedIn. Know that every single one of those posts you make during that event is actually cannibalizing the performance of your other posts. There's a general rule, again, it's not specific to from LinkedIn, but around the 16-hour window. Don't post twice within 16 hours if you can avoid it. So that's not saying to you post 5 times a week. It's simply saying frequency is less important than consistency. And what I'd say, Robin, is rather than setting regular time aside to post content, what I always advise leaders is set regular time aside to listen and to engage. And by doing that, by listening to others' content, so scrolling through your feed and engaging with relevant content, commenting, reacting, private messaging, what you're doing is improving the quality of your feed, which is far more powerful than posting a message and hoping that the right people see it. Your engagement efforts will ensure that when you have something to post and something to say, they will see it. So treat it that way. Engagement first, posting second. And the second comment that's come through, Sophie has asked, LinkedIn does not let you add a message to a connection request for the context when you are on mobile. Other than sending a message separately to their connection request, is there a solution to this? Sophie, I appreciate where you're coming from. It is one of those weird nuances, and I don't work I don't work at LinkedIn, so unfortunately I have no power over it. In mobile, it is hidden. So there is an option there. If you click on the 3 dots to add note to personalize, that will send it doesn't actually have connection request on it. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. If you add note to personalize from mobile, it gives you the option to send that same personalized context, and it will surprisingly send the connection request at the same time. So if you find that option on your mobile, it's not immediately obvious, but the 3 dots, if you know what I'm talking about, hit those 3 dots, add note to personalize, and then send it across that way. It will do the same job as your desktop. But 100%, if you can, I would strongly encourage sending a personalized or a tailored connection request. It just gives people a bit more context. Another question from Stacey. So if you've posted an article, should you wait 16 hours before commenting? Good question. Commenting, open season. You can comment as much as you like. That's not a problem at all. What I would advise though, so posting is different. Instigating conversation is different to responding to conversations. You can comment and react as much as you want. All I'll say is, remember how I was saying with the algorithm, and in fact, if I skip across here, this top line here, remember I was saying with the algorithm, it is looking at your behavior to decide what content and which people it serves you next. So if you're sitting in a very niche area or you really want to hear from a certain stakeholder group, if you're commenting and engaging and replying to several hundred people over the course of a week, you're essentially sending 100-odd different signals to the LinkedIn algorithm of people who you might be interested in. And that can be confusing for the algorithm. So instead, what I'd advise people to do, and this is where the purpose pyramid exercise that we looked at before is really valuable. The purpose pyramid helps me to work out who are my key audiences. And that might be literally the names of select individuals. Focus on those VIPs, the very important people for you on LinkedIn. Focus your engagement efforts on them. Why? Because if I'm commenting on their posts, if I'm sending them private messages, if I'm reacting and liking their content, LinkedIn's going to serve up more of their content. So you get an insight as to everything that person does. It's really valuable real-time intelligence and context. So even if you go into a face-to-face meeting a week later, you're filled with the context of what that person's been up to and what they're talking about. So if you throw that net too broad and you engage with 100 other pieces of content, know that you're going to confuse the algorithm and it doesn't quite know what to serve you. Instead, a focused approach is far more valuable. So hopefully that answers your question. But no, definitely comments do not cannibalize the performance of your post. What if you only get a couple of likes? Does that matter? I'm assuming you mean on your original post, Stacey. So if that's the case, honestly, the thing that is going to improve the performance of your content, yes, writing better posts that are more formatted to what LinkedIn likes, post optimization, it's going to improve your posts to a degree. But what I'd advise is actually spend more time in engagement. The more time you spend engaging with the right people, the more time you spend contributing to others' conversations, the better your content is going to perform. Because what you'll find is you're writing about topics and you're telling the audience who's going to be interested in those topics through your engagement, you're telling LinkedIn's algorithm, these people are going to be interested in this topic. So the best way to improve the performance of your content is actually to engage with the right people on the topics of interest and relevance to you, and then post about those topics. You will see the greatest uplift in performance improvement. Loving these questions, by the way, Daniel. Sorry we jumped straight to that, but I'll keep going with them. So we've got another one here. Why do people like their own post? Paul, that's a fantastic question. I don't know. My guess would be, and again, if someone does do that, you're welcome to share your opinion. My guess would be that some people might actually have others posting content for them. I certainly had a client previously who had others posting content on her behalf. She saw the post and thought it was great and liked it, not realizing that it was her content. She was liking her own post. So there can be those little nuances. My advice is not to like your own content unless you see a reason. If you really, really like that post, by all means do. I'm not aware of any punishment in terms of the algorithm downplaying the effectiveness of that post. What I will say is if the same people engage with your content over and over and over again, so you're not actually getting beyond that kind of bubble, if that makes sense, then LinkedIn gradually shrinks that bubble. What it treats it at is a pod. It's a name that LinkedIn's given for people who try and support one another's content on LinkedIn. They try to artificially manipulate the algorithm to improve performance. So if it sees the same 10 people engaging with your content within 2 minutes of you posting it, it's a pretty smart system, and it goes, hang on a minute, that seems far too quick for my liking. These people might be trying to doctor the performance, and it will contain the performance of your post. Again, a bit like the answer to Stacey's question, if we're trying to get better performance on our content, my advice would be start engaging with people outside. Take the we versus the me mindset into social media, and you'll find that your own content performance improves. But I can't answer the why people do it. Sorry, Paul. Carolyn, the question around video content, does it have a big impact on reach? It does, but there's a caveat there. I think the really important thing about anything you do on LinkedIn is why. What's your objective? For example, I work with a recruitment firm, and we were talking to them about how they could post most effectively to reach recruiters and to reach candidates. And in their case, they were worried because they thought that, well, people aren't necessarily going to interact with my content because they don't want to tell their employer that they might be looking for another role. And so they're immediately going to shoot themselves in the foot performance-wise, and content's not going to get spread far and wide. Instead, what they decided was a very effective content strategy was using video. So they're able to connect more personally with their audience, their own voice, their own face. You can see that through camera, through video, much more than you can through text. So they chose a video strategy with the sole purpose, knowing that they would have narrower reach, with the sole purpose of forming a deeper connection with people through their computer screen. So again, it depends on objective. But yes, generally speaking, Caroline, video does have less reach or lower reach than other types of content. But it is constantly changing. Know that the algorithm is constantly mixing these things up. And the last question here from Catherine, how important is it for the LinkedIn algorithm that your profile is viewed? Great question. I don't know if a profile view is a lead attribute or a lag attribute. In other words, if your content is out there generating interest in the market, if your comments are out there, getting exposure to new networks, these are the things that are likely to lead to people coming and looking at your profile. So the more active you are out there in market, the more likely you are to see your profile views increase. What I will say in terms of profile visibility, if you're a leader who doesn't use skills on your LinkedIn profile, you have no skills listed, or if you don't have a complete profile, and by that I mean profile photo, banner image, headline, about section, those sorts of things, you will not be as visible as other users of LinkedIn. So treat skills on your LinkedIn profile as SEO, search engine optimization, keywords for LinkedIn. If you include certain skills, if someone's searching for that skill but not your name, if you have that skill listed, you pop up. So these things are important to improve visibility, But I think that I'd be more interested in your engagement to drive people to your profile.
Can I jump in there? And on a previous LinkedIn post, you were talking about the use of tagging people when you post, and that can be really effective. But there were some downsides to that as well. Do you just talk us through that?
Yeah, sure. So when we're talking about @tagging, which is this little symbol here, so when you tag a user, so say I wanted to let Daniel know, or maybe even give Daniel some kudos in a post that I'd written, I would use the @ symbol and say @Daniel Nichols, and LinkedIn will bring up his profile. I click on that and it goes blue like a hyperlink. The importance of tagging is to let key people know that you either want to, give them some kudos or credit for whatever you're saying, or you want to invite them into the conversation. What we see commonly from executive teams in particular, and I don't know where this guidance has come from, is that they'll tag all and sundry. If there were 20 executives involved in a major campaign, they'll literally at the bottom, and you'll see this, the post, and then at the end, tag the whole executive team, as if they're saying, hey, FYI, get involved, please. Be wary of that for the same reason I was saying before about this pod concept. If you're trying to artificially manipulate the algorithm by tagging people, LinkedIn can suppress the performance of your post. But the other thing that's worth noting, if you ever tag someone in your post, whether that's a person or whether it's a company page, if you tag someone and they don't respond, LinkedIn treats that as you fishing for engagement, and it treats the failure to respond from the other party as they're not interested in what Roger has to say. So LinkedIn downweights the performance of your content. So it's really important to only tag people you think are going to engage and that genuinely would be interested in your content, rather than, tagging Brené Brown and hoping that she sees my post and comments. It's a risk. It's a real risk.
Thanks so much.
No worries. Now we've got some other questions in here. I am also conscious of time because it's nearly...
Should we just run the maybe one last two questions and then wrap up?
Absolutely. So from Ken, I noticed a post from LinkedIn Learning received a lot more interest than I was expecting. Does LinkedIn promote their own products like they're learning more? Ken, and good to see you. You've hit on a really key point there. LinkedIn is a commercial entity at the end of the day. So the things it wants to promote are in its own commercial interest. So it's a really good call out. You'll often see things like job announcements, people who have changed jobs, you see those perform really, really well. You see things like LinkedIn Learning and accreditations perform really, really well because exactly right. I mean, the skeptic in me says, of course, that's why they do it. I'm sure it's also because people are interested in those good news stories. But yes, you're right. LinkedIn is, of course, going to promote its own wares. So again, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a commercial entity and it's allowed to do that. It has shareholders. It's going to make a turn a profit. What I would say, though, is know that and use that to your advantage. So when you generate interest off the back of any post, whether it's a LinkedIn Learning, accreditation, or whether it's something else, when you generate that interest, use that interest to your advantage. Scan through the list of people who reacted or who commented and said congratulations. Open the profiles of those key people you want to put yourself on the radar of, and use that as an opportunity to reach out via private message to very key people and say, hey, great to see you pop up on the post. It'd be great to chat over coffee or something like that. Use that opportunity to deepen that relationship. There was another question here from Alex. Just to clarify your answer on using video or not, does it have a negative impact or positive impact on reach? Oh, sorry, Alex. It has a negative impact on reach. You will reach fewer people, so impressions will reduce by using video content. Now, don't get me wrong. There are video posts that go viral. There are video posts that perform out of their socks. But what I'm saying is, as a general rule, video content underperforms on reach compared to a text post or a post with an image or a post with several images. But what I was saying before is it's important to remember your objective. If you're trying to get widespread reach, sure, a video may not be your best format. But if you're trying to form a connection through a screen, as we are now, we're talking over a webinar versus me typing into my computer, it is far better to use video to form that connection. So hopefully that clarifies. And I think the last question here, if I'm right, what is the purpose of a kudo post? And how do we make it less me and the person? That's a really good question. So I'll say a general rule. LinkedIn has some or maybe a general principle. LinkedIn has some very weird and wonderful things, anomalies, if I can call them that. An example is to give someone kudos, say thank you to someone, and another is actually start a conversation by sharing your comment as a repost. In my experience, the kudos post is actually very awkward for the receiver, and people go, oh, I didn't want to be called out like that. And I've even times seen people not engage with those posts, even though you're saying something really lovely, because they just feel really uncomfortable. My advice would be, if you want to give kudos to someone, do it yourself in an offline environment or do it as a comment under their post rather than, as you're saying here, making it a very public statement. And likewise with sharing a comment. So if you write a comment and LinkedIn says, hey, start a conversation by sharing this as a repost, please don't do it because it doesn't perform. Keep it as a comment, send that person a private message, do whatever you need to do that way to get the best results. Okay. I think.
Thank you.
We've got.
Sorry, I think the questions will keep on coming. Is there anything
Sure.
I've missed? I think you've covered them all.
Yeah. And all I was going to say here's some actions in the pack for people who look at this afterwards. Do by all means audit yourself, Google yourself, see what you find. Take some time to look at your purpose pyramid will be my strong advice. We've got some of our own resources, as you know, Daniel, the podcast that we run, the newsletter that we run. You're welcome to have a look at those if you're interested in finding out more information from leaders. And this is the report that I was talking about before. The digital reputation.
Well worth looking at the report. It's got some really good, tangible examples in there.
Thank you. Yeah, I wholeheartedly encourage people to have a look. And this is the final statement to leave you with. So please do remember the only conversation you can influence is one you're part of. It's really important to remember that. So I think we've done the Q&A. As we thought there might be questions, but I'll throw it to you, Daniel, if there's anything you wanted to finish on.
Look, just conscious of time, I really appreciate everyone investing what your busy days and sharing an hour with us. And thank you so much with Roger. That was a really exceptional presentation. Some really, really good, tangible ideas for us to take away. Feel free to reach out to Roger on LinkedIn. I'm sure he'll accept the approach. And if you have any other questions, reach out.
Wonderful, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your time too.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a great day.